I didn't hear the gavel first. I heard the question dipped in vinegar. I'm sorry. Is that some kind of prop? The judge's voice slid across the room like oil on linoleum, thin and shiny and hard to wash away. He leaned forward over his polished oak bench, a robe draped on him like borrowed authority eyes fixed on the bit of sky blue ribbon that rested at my throat. I kept my hands on the wheels of my chair. Silence is a uniform too. You put it on when there's nothing left in words that can't be twisted, weighed, or written down against you. Courtroom 3B smelled like floor cleaner and old paper. The flag in the corner drooped under fluorescent light, the blue a little too gray, the red thinned out colors that had seen too many mornings like this. Sir, I am addressing you. The leather on the bailiff's belt complained as he stirred awake to the script of a Tuesday docket, overgrown hedges, expired tags' lives, snagged on small ordinances. The judge ticked them off like flies on a windowsill. My hedge had outgrown a notice I never saw. A Veterans Affairs appointment will do that, swallow a day whole, and leave you with the taste of metal. My client isn't wearing it as a decoration, the young public defender said, voice cracking on the climb. I don't care, the judge said, slicing the air with his hand. This is a court of law, not a parade ground. Remove it. Decorative medallions, he called it, as if tin and ribbon were the thing, as if the thing wasn't the names you learned to carry the way you carry a scar. A low murmur rose from the pews, all those faces waiting their turn, with minor tragedies, a lost day of wages, a meter fine that metastasizes into a warrant, the soft thunder of a system that never stops to ask who can't keep up. The judge's tone sharpened. He saw my stillness as defiance, not as breath measured against pain. Did you hear me, old man? He let the old hang there as if age were an offense you could plead to. Bailiff, assist the defendant. The bailiff lumbered 2 steps and then, to his credit, softened. Sir, he said quietly, let's not make this difficult. I turned my head and found his eyes. Kind eyes, tired. This metal, I said, careful with the words, does not come off. The judge flushed red, the color that comes when a man meets a boundary he did not expect. Contempt, he breathed, savoring the syllables. One last chance. Remove that trinket or I will have you escorted to a holding cell where you can contemplate respect. That word jolted something loose. The room fell away. The antiseptic stink became cordite in heat. The whispering gallery turned to wind over sandbags. I was 20 again, sweat stinging a healing cut along my scalp. A general's hand steady as he looped a ribbon, a color like that tired flag, but brighter alive over my neck. Your country can never repay you, he said, voice hoarse with something no courtroom has ever held, but it will never forget. Promises age. Some are elastic, some become glass. They harden, and one day you hear the hairline crack. Let the record show the defendant refuses to comply, the judge said, already reaching for a recess, like a man reaching for a coat in the rain. When we return, Mr. Kelly will either be without that medal or he will be in custody. Perhaps a night will improve his hearing. He rose and disappeared through his door robes flaring behind him. The room exhaled. People went back to their phones, but not to scroll. There's a difference between distraction and witness. My lawyer hovered, lips pale. The bailiff stood there, not sure if his job was to protect the peace or the man in the chair. I looked past them to the flag. Once a boy from Ohio named Miller had watched that same blue ripple over a winter sky the color of bone. He had asked me if his hands would ever stop shaking. I told him truth and mercy in one breath. Eventually, the trick to staying is to give someone else something to hold on to. Sir, the public defender whispered, we can appeal. We can. We can breathe, I said, for now. Out in the corridor, footsteps started to move with purpose. Not the clatter of panic, something slower, heavier, like boots that know where they're going. Somewhere a phone call had landed like a stone in a still pond. The bailiff turned toward the doors, listening. I folded my hands back on the wheels, the ribbon cool against my throat, and waited for whatever came through next. The thing about storms is you can hear them before you see the sky change. You learn to read the air. Respect, I thought. It's not a word you pull like a lever. It's a thing you earn when no one in the room thinks you can. The judge had gone to fetch his thunder. Somewhere out there, something older and quieter was answering. Ben Carter had come to court that morning expecting nothing more than a calendar clogged with code violations and traffic tickets. The kind of drudgery junior prosecutors cut their teeth on before they were trusted with real cases. His tie was too tight, his suit a shade too dark for summer, and his phone buzzed in his pocket with texts from friends who worked jobs that didn't involve windowless rooms and fluorescent lights. But when the judge barked at the old man in the wheelchair when the word trinket dropped like a stone into water, Ben stopped scrolling. He looked up, really looked, and his world tilted. The metal caught the light just so, a pale blue ribbon, a field of tiny white stars. His heart kicked against his ribs. His father's voice whispered across years and funerals. If you ever see one of those in the wild, son, stand straighter. You're in the presence of something holy. Ben's father had been a colonel, a man of discipline and dry humor, buried with folded flags and rifles firing 3 times into the sky. On the mantel back home was a shadow box with his ribbons. None of them were that ribbon. That one was different, rarer than rare. Ben's pulse quickened. Could it be there were fewer than 70 living recipients left in the entire country? Men written about in textbooks, men invited to White House ceremonies, men who carried the weight of sacrifices too large for medals to hold. Yet here one sat being scolded over a hedge. The judge recessed. The old man stayed put. And Ben Carter felt something break loose inside him, a mixture of fury and responsibility. He left the courtroom, the door closing, soft behind him, and his fingers were already dialing before his thoughts caught up. Colonel Hayes came the voice on the other end after 2 rings. Crisp, sharp, no nonsense. Sir, it's Ben Carter, General Carter's son. Ben, well, I'll be. No time, listen carefully. Ben pressed the phone to his ear, pacing the empty hallway lined with dull government posters about jury duty and civic pride. He spoke in a rush the judge's name, the wheelchair, the insult, the word trinket. Silence. Not the distracted silence of someone looking for words, but the weighted silence of someone realizing the ground had shifted beneath them. Say his name again, Hayes ordered. Martin Kelly, sir. Another pause, then the scrape of a chair, the rustle of papers shoved aside. Hayes's tone sharpened to steel. Where are you? Exact courthouse. Room number. Ben rattled it off. Stay there, son. Do not let that judge put hands on him. I'm making a call. The line went dead. Ben lowered the phone, his breath ragged. What had he just set in motion? He pictured a pebble hitting still water ripples, racing outward until the whole pond trembled. And miles away inside the headquarters of Fort Jackson, Colonel Hayes did not walk. He strode. Secretaries flattened themselves against walls. Doors opened before him without knocks. The urgency in his step carried its own authority. He entered the office of General William Thompson without waiting. Thompson was in mid-briefing with his senior staff, a man known for calm under fire. Hayes's words were clipped, precise, every syllable hitting like ordnance, a judge, a courtroom, the name. Martin Kelly. The room froze. Pen stopped scratching. Lungs forgot to breathe. General Thompson stood the chair skidding back across polished floor. The mask of calm cracked, revealing something colder, harder. Are you certain? Positive, sir. The general turned, issuing orders like thunderclaps, uniformed security detail vehicles. 15 minutes. The office became a storm. Phones, lifted aides scattering, boots pounding. Soldiers repeated the name down corridors and phone lines, each repetition adding weight. Martin Kelly. For the men and women in that base, it was like hearing that someone had tried to topple a monument. Not just insult, but desecration. Back in the courthouse, Ben Carter leaned against the wall, palms, sweating, heart thrumming. He had made the call. Now the pond would ripple, and the storm he had summoned was rolling fast. Recess ended with the scrape of heavy doors and the shuffle of restless feet. Judge Albright swept back to the bench, his robes rustling like a curtain about to rise. He settled into his chair with a smug half smile, already savoring the performance to come. I see you've chosen the path of foolishness, Mr. Kelly, he sneered. Bailiff, take the defendant into custody. 48 hours in holding and a psychiatric evaluation. Clearly this man is not in his right mind. The words hung in the stale air like smoke. The young public defender half rose, his mouth open to object. The bailiff shifted, his weight shoulders drooping with reluctance, but he began to move toward the wheelchair. Then it happened. The back doors of courtroom 3B opened, not with a crash, but with a deliberate weight smooth and inevitable as the tide. The hinges didn't squeal. They announced. Every head turned. Conversation died mid-breath. 3 men entered, not lawyers, not police, soldiers. Their Class A service uniforms gleamed under the fluorescent lights, dark green fabric pressed sharp enough to cut. Rows of ribbons sat in perfect order on their chests. Their shoes reflected the overhead glow like mirrors. The air shifted with them, a current of discipline and authority that did not belong to this weary courthouse. In the center walked a man who seemed carved from the very idea of command. The silver stars on his shoulders, 4 to a side, caught the light. General William Thompson. The bailiff froze, hand suspended above Martin Kelly's arm as if burned. The judge blinked, his mouth snapping shut, mid-rehearsed monologue. The only sound was the click of leather soles on linoleum, steady, measured, unstoppable. They didn't look left. They didn't look right. Their eyes were fixed on the old man in the wheelchair. General Thompson stopped directly before Martin Kelly. The 2 men stared at each other, time compressing until the courtroom seemed too small to contain the silence. Then, with a movement as sharp and reverent as scripture, the general raised his hand to his brow in salute. Perfect, crisp, eternal. The 2 officers flanking him mirrored the gesture. 3 men embodying the weight of the United States Army, saluting a weathered veteran accused over a hedge. The silence cracked with the sound of honor. The judge sputtered, rising halfway from his chair. What is the meaning of this? This is a court of law. You have no authority here. General Thompson did not move, did not look at him. His eyes stayed locked on Martin's. The salute held unshaken. Martin blinked, the pale blue of his eyes clear and steady. In that moment, 2 worlds touched the battlefield. In the courtroom, sacrifice and arrogance. When at last the salute lowered, the general spoke. His voice was deep, resonant, the kind of voice that could be heard over artillery or in the dead hush of a funeral detail. Sergeant Major Martin Kelly, he said, each word deliberate, heavy with reverence. It is an honor to stand in your presence, sir. The gallery gasped. Phones appeared not for distraction this time, but to capture history. The judge sat back, his face mottled, suddenly smaller inside the robe that had moments ago seemed so grand. The gavel in his hand might as well have been a child's toy. The storm had arrived not in thunder but in silent salutes and the weight of memory that no courtroom rule could erase. General Thompson's voice filled every corner of the courtroom, heavy with authority, but sharper than any gavel. For those who do not know and for the benefit of this court, let me tell you who this man is. He turned slightly, his gaze sweeping over the gallery. No one dared move. Even the judge, halfway risen, sank back into his seat. This is Sergeant Major Martin Kelly, Thompson declared. 65 years ago in the frozen hills of Korea, his platoon was ambushed and overrun. He was wounded in the first volley. His platoon leader was killed. And for 3 days in sub-zero temperatures, bleeding from 3 separate gunshot wounds, Sergeant Kelly held his ground alone. The general's voice didn't waver. Each word was a hammer strike. He repelled 4 enemy assaults. He protected the lives of 4 wounded men who could not be moved. And he called artillery strikes on his own position to keep those men alive until rescue came. He refused evacuation until every last one of his soldiers was safe. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Some people pressed hands to their mouths. Others gripped their phones tighter, recording, eyes wide with the realization that history was unfolding in front of them. General Thompson's gaze locked on Judge Albright. The trinket you ordered him to remove is the Medal of Honor, our nation's highest award for valor in combat. It is not a decoration. It is not a prop. It is a debt one this country can never repay. The judge's face had drained of color. His lips moved, but no sound emerged. His robe sagged like fabric on a mannequin. And let me remind this court, the general continued, his voice, now low-controlled, yet more dangerous for it. Title 18, Section 704 of the United States Code protects the sanctity of this medal. To order its removal is not just ignorance, it is an insult to every man and woman who has worn the uniform of this nation. The silence was absolute, broken only by the faint hum of the fluorescent lights above. Then Martin spoke. His voice was raspy, but the silence carried it further than a shout could have. Respect, he said. His gaze was not on the general, but on the judge. Respect isn't something you demand with a robe or a gavel. It isn't about titles. It's about what you do when no one's watching. It's about how you treat people, especially the ones you think have no power. The words hung in the air like scripture, undeniable and final. I came here over a hedge, Martin went on, his voice steady, almost gentle. But I stayed silent because I've lived long enough to know silence can be stronger than anger. You wanted me to respect your courtroom, sir, but you forgot to respect the man who entered it. The judge flinched as if struck. Martin's eyes softened, and for a moment he wasn't speaking to the judge at all. He was back in the snow behind a log, half buried in frost, his rifle jamming in the cold. Next to him, Private Miller had trembled, not from the weather, but from fear. Martin remembered reaching over his own hand, shaking with blood loss and gripping the boy's shoulder. "Stay with me, son. Just stay with me." That was the moment the medal had truly been born, not in ceremony, not in glory, but in the stubborn choice to stay when everything screamed to leave. Martin blinked and the courtroom returned. He drew one last breath. You can take away a man's yard. You can take away his freedom for a night, but you cannot take away what he has already given. That stays forever. A hush deeper than silence followed, the kind that changes people. The gallery was no longer a collection of strangers with parking tickets and fines. They were witnesses, people who would carry this story home, to dinner tables, to church pews, to Facebook posts that would spread like fire. General Thompson lowered his head toward Martin, not as an equal, but as a student before a teacher. And in that moment, no one in the room doubted who truly held authority. By the time Martin Kelly left the courthouse that afternoon, the world outside had already changed. The street was thick with people, neighbors, reporters, veterans drawn by rumor, and the sight of black government vehicles idling at the curb. Cameras flashed, phones lifted, questions shouted, but the soldiers who flanked Martin didn't allow the chaos to touch him. General Thompson himself took hold of the wheelchair handles and guided Martin down the stone steps. That image alone, one of the Army's most powerful men pushing a frail veteran's chair, was captured from a dozen angles and would appear on front pages the next morning. The story spread like wildfire. A shaky cell phone video of the salute inside the courtroom was uploaded within minutes and hit 500,000 views before the evening news even aired. Hashtags multiplied. Respect Kelly, Medal of Honor, never forget. Veterans organizations issued statements of outrage and solidarity. Members of Congress tweeted their condemnation of the judge's conduct, some demanding his immediate removal. Within a week, Judge Albright was placed on indefinite administrative leave. The State Judicial Conduct Commission announced an investigation, but the damage was already done. His name became shorthand for arrogance, a case study in every law school ethics seminar, the robe that tried to belittle a legend. The State Bar Association scrambled to control the fallout. In a move both symbolic and practical, they announced a new mandatory training program on veteran affairs and cultural sensitivity, quietly nicknamed the Kelly Rule. For the first time, judges and lawyers alike would sit through seminars reminding them that behind every case file could be a soldier, a nurse, a teacher, someone whose dignity deserved respect. Back in Martin's neighborhood, the city quietly dismissed the hedge citation. Days later, a crew from the Parks Department arrived with trucks and tools. They trimmed, cleared, replanted. When Martin looked out from his porch, he saw a yard restored not by punishment, but by gratitude. For Martin, the real consequence was less visible, but more profound. Letters began arriving, stacks of them, from veterans who had served decades after him, from school children who had learned his name in civics class overnight, from widows who thanked him for protecting soldiers they'd loved. One envelope contained a faded photograph, Private Miller grinning on the day he finally made it home. The note inside was written in a shaky hand, signed by Miller's granddaughter. "Thank you for staying at Red." Martin folded the letter carefully and slipped it inside the same box where he kept the ribbon and the medal. He didn't need the internet, the headlines, or the training programs. All he needed was the knowledge that after all these years, someone had remembered the staying. A month later, the afternoon sun slanted through the trees of a quiet city park. Martin sat on a bench, his chair at his side, the medal resting against his chest like it always had. Children laughed on the lawn nearby, their voices carrying the kind of freedom he once fought for. He noticed a man approaching, shoulders hunched, suit wrinkled as if it had lost the will to be pressed. Judge Albright, without his robe, without his thunder. His face was etched with exhaustion and shame. He stopped a few feet away, words sticking in his throat before finally tumbling out. "Mr. Kelly, I wanted to apologize. What I did, there's no excuse. I was arrogant. I was cruel. And I was wrong. I am so deeply sorry." Martin studied him for a moment, then gestured to the empty space on the bench. Albright hesitated, then sat. Two men once divided by power and pride, now equal under the soft light of an ordinary day. "We all make mistakes," Martin said quietly, watching the children run. "The trick is to learn from them. The uniform, the robe, the wheelchair, they're just things. It's the person inside that matters. Don't ever forget that." They sat in silence, bound not by contempt, but by the fragile chance of redemption. Stories like Martin's remind us that heroes walk among us often in the most unassuming forms. If his courage and dignity moved you, share this story, subscribe for more, and tell us in the comments about the unsung heroes in your own life. Together we keep their legacy alive.